Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theatre Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and Robin Hood Radio's very own critic and guide to all things cinematic, including streaming. He joins us weekly. The films are Belushi, Another Round, and Sound of Metal. Streaming cinema, that's got to be cinematic, right? Right.
Oh, yeah. No, these days it's all one big cinematic.
Yeah, is that the right word for it now?
Is what the right word for it?
Cinematic.
Oh, well, for me, not everybody agrees with this, but for me, I mean, all these different terms, film, movie, cinema, motion pictures, moving pictures, they're all more or less synonymous. And I have felt ever since video became a really big thing, the best of these words, it's sort of the most highfalutin, but the one I prefer to use, when I'm trying to be precise, is cinema, because cinema comes from the ancient Greek root that just means movement. So anything with a moving image is cinema, and that would include video and film and various other things too. So we live nowadays surrounded by screens and immersed in our screens and bouncing off our screens, and it's all one kind or another of cinema in my mind, or moving pictures. So, yeah, film is really the term that people still use, and I use it all the time myself. But most of what we see nowadays isn't film at all. It's that digital stuff that we keep running across. But of course, go back a few years, and at least it was all originally recorded on film. So, but anyway, all of this is a great digression from the films of this week. It's not even a digression because we haven't even started on the films of this week yet. But let's talk about three films this week, and there is a theme this week, Jill. We don't always have a theme, but each of these films in very different ways is about addiction in one way or another. And it's kind of interesting that these movies should be about that theme. When we talked recently about the film Nomadland, which is one of the films that people are talking about most nowadays, it's a very lovely film in all kinds of different ways, but my biggest quarrel with it, is that for a movie about people who have absolutely no money and no possessions and live out of their vans and wander from place to place, there's, and it is all very close to the real experiences of real life people. There's no acknowledgement in it of the horrible, what's often called the deaths of despair, or the conditions of desperation that lead to deaths of despair, very much including different kinds of addiction. And it's just completely missing from that movie Nomadland, which again has its nice qualities, but I find it a false picture because of that. But there are movies out there that do deal in very different ways with problems of addiction, and these three movies do, and each in its own way quite seriously, even though they approach that sort of problem from very different directions. So I'd like to start out by talking a little bit about Belushi, which is really a movie made for television, very much made for streaming, and is a documentary. It's our only documentary of today about, of course, the late, great major comedian John Belushi, who died at the age of only 33. It's astonishing to remember that he was that young when he left us. But he was, of course, a huge star in his time, and he became a star, first through the Second City improv comedy group, and then through Saturday Night Live, and then through some really huge hit comedy movies, most notably Animal House and the Blues Brothers. And he also, near the end of his life, he was fronting a Blues Brothers band and having just a wonderful time. He had achieved his dreams. He had a loving wife and all of that. But he was addicted, and he was doing a lot of this stuff on energy produced in artificial ways by drugs. And, it's so interesting. Even when he died, it just struck me, look at some of this guy's work. I'm thinking particularly now of Animal House. And although I was never a big fan of Saturday Night Live, which is still very much around, of course, and that kind of thing. And Animal House had its good qualities and its not so good qualities, but his energy was absolutely phenomenal. He was a physical comedian in the most over-the-top way, the most in-your-face way, and the most, in its own bizarre manner, impressive way. And I think a lot of that tremendous physicality that was such a part of his humor came in part from his body being fueled by a lot of drugs. Drugs were not all there was to it, of course not. He was really clever. He was really imaginative. He was really creative in different ways. And he could not have had that kind of career if drugs alone were what he was relying on. He had a lot of very fine artistic qualities to him. But the drugs were very much a part of it, and that was what killed him at this incredibly young age. And the movie gets into all of this stuff, to its credit. It has resources of various kinds. There's all kinds of archival material, archival footage, archival photographs, and so forth. And there are sound recordings that were made by his wife and others who wanted to put together eventually an oral history of his life and career. And so they are certainly a very strong resource that the filmmakers can draw on. And by the way, the movie was directed by R.J. Cutler, who I think has done a nice job. So there's all this archival material. If you're interested in John Belushi and his life and times, it's a real sort of nostalgia trip. It's not a very creative documentary. It does things in the usual way, and it uses animations to illustrate things, and the kind of things that documentaries nowadays generally tend to do. But if you're interested in Belushi, if you're interested in the sort of the mystery as to how somebody so hugely creative and energetic could come to such a tragic and early end, it's cast some light on that. And there are very interesting visits with people who were his colleagues, some of whom are still around, some of whom have since died themselves. But Saturday Night Live colleagues like Chevy Chase and Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd, various others, and people he worked with in other contexts as well. Carrie Fisher is very much a part of it. Filmmakers like Harold Ramis and filmmaker performers like Penny Marshall. So there's a whole lot of people in the cast of characters of this movie. And again, it's a well-made, if not a very original documentary. And anybody interested in the life and times of John Belushi should definitely have a look at it. I found it quite riveting, even though I've never been, my life has never revolved around John Belushi particularly. It's a good documentary, and it's a nice sort of a bookend for another current documentary, Zappa, about the great Frank Zappa, both about major artists who underwent various challenges in their careers, but had a real impact on the times in which they operated. Second movie today, again, each of these movies is very different, even though they all have to do with addiction, is called Another Round, and it's a Danish film, Scandinavian film, actually, in terms of where the money came from and whatnot, but made by directed and co-written by the great Danish filmmaker Thomas Vinterberg, and it stars the great Danish actor Mads Mikkelsen, who is definitely one of the big stars of today. And as the title, Another Round, might suggest, this is a movie which deals with the with alcoholism and with the addiction that is addictions that can be caused by booze and abetted by booze and that center around booze. It's a whimsical story in a lot of ways, but it has that very serious kind of central theme, which is the idea that alcohol can be a lot of fun and it can be really tempting, but if you get too much into it, you can have big problems. So Another Round deals with some high school teachers. Mads Mikkelsen plays one, and various Danish actors play others. And they are kind of, the movie doesn't really say this explicitly, I guess, but they're kind of facing midlife crises. They're a little bit bored with life. They all have, decent home lives and, loving wives and nice kids and all that stuff. And they're perfectly successful as high school teachers, okay. But they're kind of bored. And one of them runs across this interesting theory that some academic somewhere has come up with. And it is that human beings are all sort of born and live with too little alcohol in their systems, that we should all actually have a 0.05 amount of alcohol blood content, and that we're all sort of chronically low on that, sort of like being low on a vitamin or a mineral or something. So we should all have more alcohol in our system. So we should all do some drinking as the day goes by to keep our alcohol blood content up to that level. So these guys, they say, they're all guys, they say, well, that sounds interesting. Let's give that a shot. Now, again, they're high school teachers, so they're not supposed to exactly drink around the classroom. So they come up with various ways of kind of sneaking booze that they can have when they feel they need to raise their blood alcohol content a little bit more. They also they sort of disguise all this, and they disguise it for themselves as well as for others as a kind of a research project. They decide they're going to write a report on this, and so they start, keeping sort of a computer log of their experiences and how it's going for them and so forth. So they oh, well, we're being responsible, we're being scholarly about this, but of course what they're really doing is drinking. And they set up rules as well. Always, I think, a sure sign that there may be an alcohol problem around the bend. So they start setting up. And one of their rules is they will only drink during work hours, not outside of work hours. So they're kind of going about this in a wrong way. And as you can tell from what I'm saying, Another Round it's a comedy, but it's a serious comedy. So here they are, and of course one can predict what's going to happen. They get more and more into the booze, and before you know it, they're drinking all the time, and they're drinking too much, and from time to time they're falling down drunk, even though this is a research project that they're embarked on, and they're not supposed to let anybody know what's really going on, and all kinds of problems emerge from all this. So that is what Another Round is about. It's about a bunch of guys who just can't ever seem to resist from having another round, even though they're supposed to be respectable high school teachers embarked in some sort of a research project. The movie is very lively. It's very funny at times. It's kind of poignant and sad at other times. Thomas Vinterberg is a very good director, and he gets really good performances from pretty much everybody, including Mads Mikkelsen. I don't think it's a great movie. I don't think it delves into any great deep insights into these characters or into their situation, but it's very interesting to watch. It's sort of fun to watch. And again, it's a comedy, but it's a very serious comedy in various ways. So I had a good time with it. Way back a long time ago, Thomas Vinterberg was part of the Dogma 95 group of filmmakers who came out of Denmark, who wanted to make their movies absolutely bare bones with no frills, no effects or anything like that. And he still kind of pretty much comes from that sensibility, even though it's no longer a dogma with him. And Another Round is a nice, modestly made but lively movie that I had a good time watching, and I think a lot of people will enjoy it. And it does have some serious things as well as some comedic things to say about problems of alcohol addiction. Final movie today, Sound of Metal, a movie directed by Darius Marder. And it is not really about addiction, but it's very much in the background. The hero of it, if you can call him a hero, is a heavy metal drummer whose name is Ruben. And we find out not too long into the movie, is a recovering heroin addict. He says, every kind of dope there is, but mainly he took heroin. And by the time the movie starts, he's pretty much out of that. So this is not a movie about addiction in that way. But he still has problems, and he still has perhaps physical difficulties that maybe are partly a result of his period as a drug addict. But he's more or less recovered, and he's certainly doing very nicely, playing his heavy metal drums, banging away at those skins, banging away with his sticks, and he has a lovely girlfriend who he travels with, and they work together, and she's a singer, and she shrieks her heavy metal music, and he bangs his heavy metal drums, and that's what they do. But then something happens that is a terrible tragedy when it happens to anybody, I guess most particularly a musician. He goes deaf. Early in the film, he loses virtually all of his hearing. And he is not an educated guy. He's not a very thoughtful guy. He's not a very introspective guy. And even though he's told, he's told by a physician, let's try to save what tiny bit of hearing you've got left. Stay away from loud noises. He goes back to those drums. He got to keep doing it to earn his living. And of course, the worst happens, and before you know it, he is just about profoundly deaf. So fortunately for him, a sponsor of his in his addiction recovery program is able to find him a place with an addiction recovery program which is able to deal with him as a deaf person. And so he finds himself in this place with a whole lot of deaf people, some of whom are school children and others of whom are adults, and they're all working together, and the adults recovering together in some cases from addictions, but all dealing with their deafness, learning sign language, that sort of thing. And he's able to fall in with these people, and it pretty much apparently saves his life. But he never gives up his dream of getting back to the road, getting back to his drums, getting back to his music, getting back to his girlfriend, and all of that. And the big question that hangs over most of the film is, will he succeed in doing that, or will he find a new kind of life, perhaps a very contented one, staying with this community of people who have taken him in and with whom he appears to be pretty contented, but always wishing he could get back to that earlier life of his. The main character, Reuben, is played by the actor Riz Ahmed, who gives a wonderful performance, and I really think it's one of the better performances we've seen all year. He is just excellent. The movie has a fair amount of music in it. It has a whole lot of very sensitive human drama in it, and that's really the kind of movie it is. It's not an addiction drama. It's not a music drama. It's a very human drama, and I found it very absorbing, and I think it's one of the better movies, not one of the best, but one of the better movies we've seen this year. So I think one could do far worse than go to see Sound of Metal for a warm human drama that has a lot to say about real, genuine human problems. And that is my somewhat, slightly addictive story this week, Jill.
It's always addictive talking to you, David Sterritt. Films in Focus, the films Belushi, Another Round, and Sound of Metal.